Hello and welcome to the first installment of my campaign diary. This is going to be a series where I talk about my personal Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition campaign. The caveat being that it's a heavily homebrewed one, but we'll get to that in a second. And the series is going to be me summarizing the events of each game, talking about what I plan to do in the future, anything I learned from that session, any funny moments, any interesting insights that I've picked up from how the game was played, and just generally talking about my own personal D&D campaign. So before I get into the summary of the first session, I want to describe a few changes that I've made to 5th edition to better fit in with the setting of the game and also to make the game play and feel more like an OSR style game or old school Renaissance, which was really big in 2023. This kind of revival of second edition and earlier style tabletop RPGs. And I have like 4 or 5 pretty big changes to the way 5th edition behaves to kind of capture that feeling. And I'm just going to list them in no particular order and try to explain them the best I can without throwing out a bunch of numbers. The first change is that players have less HP instead of rolling their hit dice every level and then gaining that amount of maximum HP. They only do that on the levels where they get ASI or ability score improvement. On every other level, they don't get to roll that and add to their maximum HP. Instead, they just get 1 plus their constitution modifier in maximum HP. So that way, the players are still a bit squishier and they feel vulnerable still. They can't take insane amounts of damage. The exception to that being, which we haven't actually seen in game because no one has played them yet, is barbarians. I think we have it so they roll twice and keep the highest, or they get twice their con. And paladins, the way their lay on hands works is different because of the way HP works and how spells and magic work. They basically get temporary HP that they could dish out as their healing hands, but we'll get into that a little bit further. And those are just to make those martial classes more martial. And fighters obviously get their second wind and their additional ability score improvements, so they don't need to worry about that. And to balance that out and to make the world feel equally lethal, monsters and NPCs, which I just call NPCs monsters because that's my just train of thought, will have less HP as well. Instead of a goblin having like 7 HP, it's just going to have 1 or 2 at most. And if an attack lands, then it's just dead. Only give more HP to larger things. And in addition to that, most monsters don't add proficiency to their hit or modifiers to ranged weapons because most monsters I feel like wouldn't actually be super skilled in their weapons. Like goblins shouldn't be super proficient in their weapons because they're just lowly creatures. Basically what I'm trying to do is make all of the numbers smaller so we don't have this constant arms race of adding more and more and more to the point where it's like Yu-Gi-Oh, where things have 12,000 hit points or however Yu-Gi-Oh works and it just feels meaningless. I don't actually know how Yu-Gi-Oh works, so that could be entirely wrong. The second change is that magic no longer requires spell slots. Instead, there is a 2 cast chance. So instead of you expending a first level spell slot to cast Magic Missile, you could just cast Magic Missile, but you have to actually roll to cast it. It's a skill check now, and that uses your ability modifiers to cast it, and the DC for the spell is, I think it's 10 plus the level plus the numbers of times you cast a spell of that level per day. So if you cast Missile twice in one day, then the DC would be 12 or 13. I think 12. And to balance out this constant access to magic, more so than just the chance of it failing, because some spells just do fail outright if the creature makes a save. If the roll is really bad, or if it's a critical failure, then there could be some serious consequences, like you want to summon a familiar, but you roll bad, so you summon an imp, and now you have to fight it. Or you want to cast Healing Word, but you fail, so instead of healing that guy, you hurt yourself. That kind of thing. And a spin off of that is that most, if not all, of the class abilities that are once a day or how many times per day per proficiency modifier amount, anything like that is instead on a recharge. So take a Battle Master fighter. Instead of being able to do maneuvers once per day or 3 times per day or however many times per day, you could keep doing them, but you have to recharge them. Basically, how recharge works for monsters is it could use the ability right out the gate, and then afterwards, for the rest of combat, it has to roll a certain number on a die. It's usually 5 or 6. And if it lands on it, then that ability is recharged, and they could use it again. And this was done to make the non-spellcasters more viable, but also to tie in with the next change I made, which is almost entirely superficial and cosmetic and more of like a narrative thing. But instead of long rests taking 8 hours and short rests taking an hour, now a short rest is an entire week and a long rest is a month. Now that seems like a very, very long time, but that's just to add a kind of feeling of realism to kind of ground the characters, where they're not healing all of their broken bones and torn ligaments in an afternoon or by taking a nap or even like sleeping it off over the course of a week. It's going to be very hard to do, but recovering over a month is a lot more realistic without being too crazy. It's also not that big of a deal because, as we've established before, healing magic, you could just keep doing it. There's a chance of a backfiring, but if it's in a pinch, you could keep doing it until you're topped off again. And you don't have to really worry about running out of spell slots because, again, it's all skill based. There's no resource management for anything other than the material goods your party has, like arrows and ammunition and food and stuff. Your actual character abilities are not a resource, they are simply a tool which you always have. Well, you theoretically always have access to it. There's chances where it's going to be denied when, of course, it's being in recharge, obviously. And the other reason is that with how lethal the game is and how kind of grounded it is, I really like the idea of these party members becoming like folk heroes and like celebrities over the course of years in the narrative. It'll only be a couple weeks or even months in like real life, but in the game it's going to be years and years. And that way your characters leveling up feels like they're getting older and progressing. And the final change that's kind of major, there's a bunch of other little things that I like adding in, like how piercing damage works, but we're not going to get into all that stuff. If it comes up, we'll mention it. But the final big thing is, instead of being milestone or just giving XP per encounters, it's going to be gold for XP. If you don't know what gold for XP is, I don't know how to help you because it's pretty self-explanatory. Instead of just having gold as a treasure, you need to actually buy your levels on a one-to-one exchange. 1 gold equals 1 XP, and you want to get as much gold as possible. That's straight out of the early editions. It's super OSR, and it kind of changes D&D into this epic heroism into a more grounded dungeon crawling treasure extraction tactics game, which is really fun. And you could still have like this grand narrative, but it's played out more so in the background, like a traditional RPG, like the way Gygax would run. And those are the majority of the mechanical changes I've made to kind of get the feeling I'm going for. There are tons and tons and tons of lore changes because this is an entirely homebrew setting based on some stuff from D&D, based on stuff from real world history, mythology, based on other writers and all that stuff. And it's just kind of hodgepodge I have put together with my own like thoughts and ideas. So the way one creature or thing would behave in any other campaign setting will behave differently here, and I'll go into those as we get to them. But that's all the mechanics, and we'll get to the lore changes as they come up, which will be soon because let us introduce our characters. Well, our players and then our characters. First up, we have my friend Bo, who will be playing a halfling warlock named Taliesin. There may be a weird pronunciation difference than how I pronounce it. I don't know. That could just be me not hearing properly. But the basic gist is that her family has some connection with either a fae or a fiend or some other kind of creature. He keeps giving me these different pitches, and in other games they'd be good, but there's a very specific way that extraplanar creatures behave in this setting that make it very tricky to use. So we're just still trying to work everything out. Again, I don't want to do this grand schemes for player characters because of how lethal the setting is, and making these big plans when a character could die unceremoniously isn't a good thing. And that's going to come up later in the video, so just put a pin in that. The second thing of note is that his character is a halfling. She is a halfling, but the way halflings work in this setting is weird, and it's a byproduct of some weird Warhammer thing I read. So, in this setting, humans are on top because humans are basically the only real organic creatures. Elves aren't these basically humans that look a little bit different, that live longer. They are basically alien creatures that live in the woods. Orcs are these vicious monstrosities that are like lions and boars and gorillas mixed together to form this monster. Dwarves are enigmatic creatures made out of stone. All of these basically fantasy races that we've just come to accept as just being humans with a different coat of paint are completely alien. The exception being that humans are the basic humanoid creatures, so they're the protagonists of the setting essentially. All of the player characters are going to be humans or human derivatives, which I'll get into, except for again one in the future, which we'll get to. Now, halflings are humans in this setting. They are simply humans who are born with some kind of curse or birth defect, or however you want to rationalize it, whether it's magic or biological. That's like a big theme in the setting, is what is natural and what is, magical. It's basically dwarfism. There's no mechanical differences really because all of the players just use standard array with the variant human minus a feat. Just basically pick some skills and some pluses to one and whatever. Basically the Tasha's thing, because just having +1 to everything doesn't really work for the theme I'm going for. Because I want all of the players to be human, but I also don't want them to all be the same mechanically. Also, I should add, of course, the halflings are a size small instead of medium. They just don't really have any other major mechanical differences. The other weird variant of human is I found a very, very cool video about Ogrins from Warhammer, and I fell in love with the idea of these really, really stupid human subgroup that is just very, very likable because even if they're not the brightest, they have a big heart. And so I just added that to the setting. Ogres are again, very similar to halflings, either a magical blessing or curse, or it's a birth defect. It doesn't matter. The important thing is that occasionally you're walking around a human settlement and there's going to be a person who is very small, but other than that, they're just a person. Or there's going to be a really, really big guy who's probably going to be dumb, except I'm probably going to have some of them be smart because I like that little subversion. But it's not going to be all of them, only some. Because if you do subversion all the time, then it's not subversion, it's just lame. Now, I didn't go too much into the character of Taliesin because it was only session 1. We're still trying to figure out how these characters behave, and having the new character be separate from your own personality, it takes some time to get used to. Now, our second player is Usopp, and he is going to be playing a Kensei, I believe, or Kensei, a Kensei monk, which is just a monk that uses martial weapons a lot. Again, the personality isn't really set because it's only session 1, but as I explain the events, hopefully we get a feel for the personality. And also, it's kind of hard to judge personalities of characters because a lot of it does bleed through with players, and I've played D&D with these people for probably 2.5, maybe 3 years now. It's hard to tell. I'm not good with time. So it's very hard to keep track of what's a personality because like none of us are actors. We don't have the ability to swap personalities on the fly. So it's a lot more fluid and gradual. Now the final player, Jan, he's playing a very special character that has a long backstory out of game. He is playing a bear. It's just a bear, a CR 1/4 black bear. And there's this big backstory about why and what the plans were, and I might even make a separate video talking about the whole shit show that was the progenitor of this setting. But just know that I really wouldn't want someone to be playing a non-human character in this setting if not for the fact that one, I trust Jan very much to make a character that is in line with the setting, because he too is also a DM who I imagine runs very similar to the way I do. We've talked back and forth about how we run our games, and there seems to be a lot of overlap. And the second reason is that I feel like I kind of owe him, because this character he's been trying to play with other games has never worked out because of the other games just falling apart for a variety of reasons, which I might make a video separate about that. But just know he's playing a bear. It's just a straight up bear named Bear Whitney. It's a pun, and when he said that, I gave him a -1 honor, which is an inside joke. When I first ran my campaign, we used sanity and honor mechanics, which is a variant rule in the back of the DMG, and there was a bit where Usopp's character had a gardener who was a gnome, and there was a joke about him wearing like a gardening uniform that was like the garden gnome uniform, like the little blue shirt and the red cap and the brown pants, that little bit. And I jokingly made him make an honor roll to see if his character is racist enough to make him wear this, what would be like a racially insensitive outfit in the context of the world. And he crit failed it, so we decided that he was actually racist and that he made his gnome gardener wear a traditional gnome outfit to do gardening in. So whenever someone says something kind of racist, intentionally or otherwise, the quick joke is -1 honor for racism. And every time I've said it, I think Jan kept a track of it, at least for my second campaign, which was like the Space Spelljammer campaign. I'll have to ask him how many times everyone has gotten a -1 honor, which we were not keeping. It was a joke. It was not something we kept serious track of as it had an effect in the world. It was just a joke. Now, with our characters and their backstories, or rather lack thereof, established, let's actually get into the session 1 what happened, what did they do, and how did things go bad, because they did. Our story begins in a quiet little village that I did not give a name to because usually I like it to have some kind of meaning, typically tying into food because food is like a big part of the lore. I'll get into it further. But the important thing is that this little village doesn't have a name. I usually just have the party members come up with a name for stuff because it saves me brain power, which is something I do not have a lot of. Taliesin and Rhinos just so happen to be in town when showing up is the remains of a some kind of circus that was apparently attacked by bandits, and the kind of ringleader type character was stabbed in the robbery and he is dying, and basically while they're trying to do medieval surgery on him, he's demanding that people go out and kill the bandits who've, basically murdered him, and that he's willing to give a bunch of gold and all of his possessions to whoever manages to do that and avenge him. I'm gonna spoil it right now, but the party does not get that gold. But for the time being, Rhinos and Taliesin hear about this. They go to the church where the man is being operated on, and Rhinos basically says, "Hey, I'll go kill those bandits for you in exchange for the gold." The dying man says, "Yeah, kill him, make him suffer." And he also says that when he came into town after being stabbed and all of his people abandoned him, what's left behind is their trained bear, who again is played by my friend Jan. Now, the twist with these characters is that the circus people were actually bandits and that they robbed a Merchants Guild caravan, and the Merchants Guild successfully fought them off and then chased them as they split apart. So this guy was basically just trying to convince someone to go and kill some actual legitimate businessmen and guards because he wanted to rob them and get away with it, and he didn't. And the only one who knows that is the bear, who cannot talk because it is a mundane, non-magical bear, who probably doesn't even like the circus people because to train a bear, you gotta like whip it and shit, and that's, gonna build resentment. But the old man who got stabbed says, "Take the bear because it could probably track better than a dog can," and mainly just so I could get the party together. Whenever I start a campaign, I just immediately say, "Okay, you're all together and y'all know each other a little bit. This thing's happening. Get on, move on," because I'm really, really bad at introducing characters to each other. I can introduce them to a narrative, but introducing them to each other is not my forte. I just say, "You see these people, introduce yourselves to each other. Okay, here's the plot." So, with the plot handed to them, they decide to track down the bandits who killed this guy, or they believe killed this guy and robbed him. With some successful survival checks, the bear leads them westward, I believe, where they discover a cart that has been severely damaged by a goblin trap. The trap being that there is a log that runs perpendicular to the road on the road, and then when a cart comes by, they just pull up two ropes, which raises it, and it basically cracks the rear axle of the wagon. There are 5 goblins that are rooting around the wrecked cart. The party sneaks up on them, and they all pass their stealth checks except for the bear. So Rhinos and Taliesin kind of hang behind and wait to see what happens. The goblins spot the bear approaching and begin doing a little bit of a display to kind of scare it off because they're goblins. They don't realize that this is a player character who is going to eviscerate them. And it should also be noted that these goblins, as I said previously, are not the typical D&D goblins. They do not add a proficiency to hits. Their ranged weapons do not have their dex modifier added to them. They hit less often and a little bit less is hard, but they still do decent damage because less HP. The bear goes up and eviscerates two of them, one with its claw attack, one with its bite attack. They're just grabbing, sort of shaking them around, ripping them apart. The goblins make their attacks, and because of the initiative order, Rhinos got a held action, so he went and threw a dart at one and killed it. I don't recall if Taliesin actually killed any of the goblins. I think she landed a hit on one of them with a magic stone, I believe is the spell. It's the warlock cantrip that also wizards get, and I think maybe druids, where you just throw a rock and it does more damage. The goblins are getting killed. Some of them hop down off the cart, start stabbing at the bear. They do a good chunk of damage, but then Rhinos moves up and starts stabbing them with his short sword and throwing darts at the ones that are a bit further away. The bear makes more attacks, and they just slaughter the goblins. They do a quick investigation of the cart, where they find the guard and one of the merchants, who are both dead. With a medicine check, they discover that they were stabbed and killed not by bandits or by people, but with very crude stone and wooden weapons, obviously the work of goblins. I do accidentally say merchant, when in reality they wouldn't know this yet unless they made a check to determine that. Probably history, which they do make later for something, but I'll get to that when we get to that. A big thing I have as an issue is accidentally giving away information because I know something to be true, and just describing it over and over again gets kind of tedious. So I just tend to accidentally say what it actually is. But I don't believe they picked up on it, so it doesn't matter too much. With their investigation, I believe Taliesin finds a lockbox which contains an object, which we'll get into later. And I forgot to mention this earlier. When they got the bear, they also got a scroll case from the wagon that the guy rode in on that had the bear with it. It doesn't come up till later, so I just forgot about it. But there's a scroll case that they did not open, and they have it in their possession currently. But they find this lockbox, which in this setting, it's later medieval, early Renaissance. So locks are around, but they're not as common as they would be in like D&D setting where everybody has locks and stuff. So because none of them are trained in lock picking, they're gonna have to go find a locksmith, which is like a very respected and uncommon profession in this setting. But they find that, and while feeling up the dead merchant, Rhinos finds that he has 2 gold coins sewn into his clothing as like an insurance. So he cuts those and takes those 2 coins. He was gonna take some of the weapons from the goblins, but I basically just said that your weapons are better than theirs. If you use theirs, it'll break, and you can just make your own weapons out of sticks and rocks that would be probably better than the goblins. Before they killed the last one, they noticed it was going to be start fleeing towards they're going west before, now they'd be going south. So to the southwest of the village, they notice a goblin trying to run, they kill it, and they head off in that direction. Taliesin uses her Raven familiar because she is a Pact of the Raven Queen warlock, which again ties into the weird thing where how there's not really a Raven Queen in this setting, but there's various different extraplanar beings who kind of fill that niche. We'll get to that as the series develops. But with that investigation and their own tracking, they discover a cave which has some very hodgepodge kind of thrown together, almost barricades of little piles of rocks and boulders, as if they're fortifying this cave, and also maybe that what was ever in the cave was cleared out and kind of used to make this defenses. They venture in, they have the bear going first, and then the monk Rhinos, and then Taliesin behind. They crawl along this cave. It gets darker and darker. The only one who has dark vision is Taliesin because of her Raven familiar, which she gets from her class. They're all basically wandering through the dark. As they're going, they kind of meet a dip in the tunnel where there's water accumulated, and they trudge through that for a bit, and the bear has to make a dex save, which he passes, and almost steps on a bear trap, but he just puts enough pressure to notice it, but not enough to actually trigger it, and then just gestures to the other ones to kind of illustrate that there is a trap here. They acknowledge and continue going forward, where they have to make stealth checks. Enough of them fail that a sleeping goblin further down the cave notices, wakes up, and begins fleeing. They can't keep up with it because they're all bunched together through these tight corridors. They advance further, reaching the end of the tunnel into the larger cave section. Taliesin moves forward to kind of go ahead, sticking behind through everybody, because again, she's a small creature, so she can move through those larger spaces. And Rhinos lights a torch so we can actually see. Taliesin moves forward, where she is attacked and hit a few times by a little bit of an ambush. I believe there was like 5 or 6 goblins in this chamber. A few of them hit, a few of them don't. She gets hit. With the initiative happening, the bear advances, and then Rhinos moves in with the light. The bear manages to kill a few, Rhinos comes in and kills a few, and one of the goblins comes running away from the far corner where it's dark and they can't see. It appears to be afraid of something, and as they're fighting these goblins and killing them, out of nowhere, a boat is thrown at them. They make their save, so the boat just smashes into some goblins and kills them. They notice that the boat is filled with straw and hay and wool and animal pelts as like a makeshift bed. And slowly stepping out of the shadows is an orc. Very similar to how halflings, humans, and ogres in this setting are all one species with variation. That's how goblins and orcs and some trolls and stuff like that work, where a goblin is just a diminutive form of the species that is also an orc. So this monstrosity comes stumbling out of the darkness, and I believe all the goblins are dead by now. If not, most of them are. There is the one smaller goblin hiding in the corner, cowering, but that's not really an issue right now. It's not attacking the party. The orc has a very shoddily made great club, which it attacks the bear with. The bear takes some damage. The orc takes some damage from the bear. Rhinos and Taliesin are killing the goblins. I don't know if Taliesin gets too many hits off because she uses a lot of ranged weapons with the magic stone, so she doesn't hit too many. And eventually the orc just smashes over the bear with the great club, which breaks the great club and also downs the bear. The orc advances on Rhinos and starts fighting him. Rhinos and the orc are fighting. Taliesin tries to sneak away, but the orc grabs Rhinos by the throat and kind of uses him as an improvised melee weapon to try to hit Taliesin. He misses, but because he's still grabbing onto Rhinos, he begins, crushing his throat, which is dealing damage automatically. The last goblins are killed, and it's just Rhinos repeatedly stabbing and punching the orc. He does do enough damage to kill it. However, the way I had orcs in this setting work is that, unlike in Warhammer, where they just believe in something and it happens, in this setting, orcs, as long as they're angry, they don't die, which basically means they have to make death saves, and while they're making death saves, they're still not unconscious. But I'm gonna change that. I'm just gonna give them the undead fortitude that zombies have, because it's easier that way, and it's a lot more fair, and less stuff I have to keep track of. But so they realize that this thing should be dead, but it's still too angry to die, but then he keeps punching it in the face, and eventually goes down after smashing its teeth in. While that happens, the bear, Jan's character, does fail its death saves, with 1 critical failure and 1 regular failure. Afterwards, he starts rolling actual dice to see what would happen, and everything he rolls for like the next 3 times would have been a failure. So it's just very bad luck. With all but 1 of the goblins dead, they notice it's cowering in the corner. It appears to be a smaller, more diminutive goblin. It's either a newborn or like some kind of runt. And Taliesin, not understanding how the setting works, tries to console this little baby goblin, and immediately the goblin bites her, and then she grabs it and throws it against the wall, and it dies. Because in this setting, goblins and orcs and trolls and all these monstrous races aren't really races. They are monsters. They don't have a good conscience. They don't have morality. They are created by evil beings to be evil. And you can't change that unless you want to do like mind control magic and stuff. But that's kind of missing the point, because if you have to mind control something to be good, is it really good at all? Like, if you take a creature that has no free will of its own and is created to be evil, and then just use more mind control to make it good, still devoid of free will, it's not really good, because what makes something good is choosing to do it. I don't know, it's a big thing in philosophy that I don't want to get too into right out of the gate, but it's just something to think about. They mourn the loss of the bear, look around the cave some more, find a rotting pile of meat, venison, random animals, some people, and it's a big pile that's all gross that they just don't want to touch for obvious reasons. And rummaging through some more stuff, they find several bolts of cloth that were either stolen from this merchant or a different merchant, but they find some bolts of cloth. And Rhinos does not help carry them. Taliesin, the small halfling, does, and she has to make a strength check, which she gets really low on, so she only managed to carry 2 out of the cave. They were planning on putting the bear on the boat and then dragging it out, but the boat wouldn't really fit through the cave with a bear on it. We end up referencing the couch gag from Family Guy, where they're trying to get the couch onto the Millennium Falcon for the Star Wars special. That's basically what it'd be like, only now there's a bear on it, and there may be more goblins coming back. They don't know. They get out of there before they have to find out, so it's fine. They make their way back to the village without any kind of interference. When they get there, they discover that there is numerous guards and more merchant guild representatives in the village discussing things with the local law enforcement, the town guards. Eavesdropping in, they discover that the circus guy that they met and who was stabbed in the process of robbing the merchant caravan, so he was a bad guy. Rhinos goes and talks to the guards, where they tell him that because, it was all ill-gotten gains, he's not going to be getting the gold that was promised him. They will, however, let him keep the bear, the cart, and horse, which is dead, which I forgot to mention, but we'll come back around to that. And he leads them back to the wrecked Merchant Guild cart where the goblins were, and then comes back. In the meantime, Taliesin hid the lockbox that they stole from the wrecked caravan. Rhinos attempts to pick the lock with one of his darts, which is something Usopp's characters always try to do, and it never works out. He rolls very poorly, so they're going to have to go find an actual locksmith to open this thing. While looking over their stuff, they open up the scroll case and find that the scroll case has the sigil engraved in it of the Merchants Guild, meaning that it was stolen from them by the circus people. They decide to keep it and look inside, and inside is a piece of paper with a illustration of what appears to be some kind of comedy mask. And this is kind of a piece of overarching thing that happens in this setting. I don't have exactly the way it behaves, like mechanically written down, but I want these comedy masks to behave kind of like the bailiff from Berserk, or some other kind of weirdly powerful and enigmatic demonic thing, some kind of crazy magic item that is going to be elusive and hard to find. And obviously the Merchants Guild is going to want to have access to a very powerful magical item. It should also be noted that magic in this setting is very, very, very uncommon. Most people don't believe in magic. Some people believe in orcs and goblins and gnomes and all that stuff because some people have encounters with them. But the further away you are from civilization, the more magic and monsters there are. So people who live in big cities will never experience like an orc attack. So they're not really going to believe they exist. Other than that, Taliesin takes the bolts of cloth to one of the merchants, and with the help of Rhinos, there is a critical success on persuasion to sell it to him, which he pays pretty good prices for, despite the fact that they are pretty ragged and dirty and will not be sold for as much. With the money they've gotten on this adventure, which is not as much as they could have if they just took the guy's money beforehand or got back sooner, they decide to rest up. They take a short rest, which is a week. They pay 1 gold per week to stay at an inn, which is how we decided the prices are, just so it's easier. And that is where the session ends. One thing I want to do is have them be a lot more proactive in seeking out adventures instead of me just dropping random things in their lap to do. With how things went last time, there are a few things I could imagine they're going to do. Probably travel around to find a town that has a locksmith, possibly retrieve the body of the bear, or even try to capture another bear because they have a cart with a cage on it. And maybe then Jan could finally play this bear character that he's been trying to play for probably a year, at least 6 months. With the session summary done and basically future plans explained, again, nothing super in detail, no grand schemes. I'm just going to let the party go on adventures and then build up from there. I want to talk about a few things I missed during the summary, which I was reminded of because I recorded the first half and the second half of the summary separately. So, the first funny thing is that when they discovered the bear, Rhinos attempts to ride it, which led to a 15-minute argument about how big bears are and what kind of species this bear is. We've decided it is a New Jersey bear for some reason. When they found the bear, it was in a cage which was on the carriage, which was being pulled by a horse that was visibly injured in a firefight. It had multiple arrows in it. Rhinos, Usopp's character, attempts to do medicine to remove the arrows, at which point he crit fails and accidentally kills the horse by ripping the arrow out backwards, causing it to bleed to death and spasm. He just kind of pats it on the head and then goes about with his new bear friend. When they come back, they're trying to sell the meat to the butcher, but it's been out all day, so they don't want to buy it. When trying to figure out how the goblin trap that broke the rear axle of the wagon worked, the bear makes a intelligence check, and because it's a bear, he gets a -3 on his roll, which is really, really funny, and it's probably not even the lowest thing that anyone has rolled in one of my games. It also says in my notes of session highlights, Rhinos finds religion, with religion in quotations. I have no idea what that's in reference to, but it's probably very, very silly. And with that is basically everything I wanted to say about the session. So I haven't figured out a good way of signing off on these things. So I'm just going to go start editing and get it done, so it'll hopefully be out before next session. And with that, thank you for watching and or listening. I apologize for the poor quality. It's not going to get any better.